MacMillan, it's a great joy to have you as a guest today. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
It's a great pleasure. I have many happy memories of coming to Bucharest and meeting some of my publishers there, and I'm sorry we're doing this virtually.
Yes, well, actually, I was hoping to see you here in person on the occasion of the launching of your third book in Romania, but fortunately we have Zoom, so we'll do it online.
Yeah, good.
So as I said, this autumn we are launching your third book in Romania. This is History's People, Personalities and the Past. The two previous titles that we have published so far, The War That Ended Peace, The Road to 1914, and Peacemakers, 6 Months That Changed the World, have enjoyed a tremendous success here in Romania, as they actually have elsewhere in the world. Both titles have dealt with landmark moments in the history of the 20th century, the beginning of the First World War and the period leading to it in the former case, and the Paris Peace Conference of 1919-1920 and the aftermath of the First World War in the latter. Now, History's People, however, is not about a book about a certain period or event in history, but as the title shows, about personalities in general. People that one way or another left their mark on history, people that made history, actually. Now, my question comes, why this change of paradigm? Why a different approach in your writing history books? What is the purpose of this new way of looking at history, particularly that, as you note in your book, biographies are often considered a lesser genre, let's say, minor genre, and biographers are often looked down upon.
When you write history, I think, and I think we all do this, every so often I think you stop and reflect on your own profession, what it is you're doing. And I am very interested in the great moments of 20th century history, and always have been. And I recognize that there are great forces in history, that clearly economics, geography, demography, ideas, all these things matter enormously. And a country with a great deal of power can do more for good or for evil than a country with less power. And so we have to take into account those forces. But occasionally I think it's good to stop and reflect on the interplay between the forces and other sorts of things. And so this book I did, History's People, grew out of my work, I think, because so often I came across often very powerful individuals with very strong ideas or strong opinions or strong values whose decisions made a difference because they were in positions of power. And so I thought I would look at the relationship between history, which is moved by so many different things, and the individuals. And I thought also, in my own case, and I think in the case of a lot of other people, what makes us interested in the past is that sense that there were people back there, that these were not just figures in funny clothes, wearing funny types of hats or with funny types of hair, that these were individual people, they were human beings, not like us because they were different, they came out of different times, but in some ways like us because we too are human and we too have irrational sides and we too have emotions and we too try and think for ourselves. And so I thought History's People might explore the ideas of how often it matters who is in power, and sometimes it doesn't. But I also want to explore this idea of some sort of connection with the past. What is it that makes us interested in the past? And certainly for me, it's reading a diary or reading a letter or getting a sense that there was someone. They don't have to be powerful people. And often they're people who live very quiet lives, but they too count. And I'm also interested in the people who give us the records, who write the records, who write the diaries and the letters. You know, without them, we wouldn't know about the past. And, you know, you can read government documents and they can tell you a certain amount, but they don't give you the full picture of what it is like to live through a time. I mean, if you just read the government documents of, say, Romania or Britain or Canada, where I come from, for the 20th century, it would not give you the full picture. It's the individuals who notice things and who tell us things. And so it was an attempt to try and look at some of what we do when we're doing history.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Now, your book scans the past and, of course, occasions, encounters with various people, as you say. It's a large array of characters that you present in the book, that you bring forth and present to your audience. Some we like, some we admire, some others we despise or even loathe. You propose different typologies, and you organize your book, you structure your book around 5 categories. I won't go into all of them now, of course, but just to pinpoint some for our audience. You speak about persuasion and the art of leadership with Bismarck, William Mackenzie King, the Canadian Prime Minister, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Also about hubris, you speak in a second chapter. Figures that are animated by driving ambition, success and power, you say, went to their head, quite colloquially. And here you enumerate Margaret Thatcher, Woodrow Wilson, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler. Now, other category is that of risk takers, which you group in a chapter called daring. Some others in another chapter called curiosity, and the observers, exactly what you mentioned previously, those that write memoirs and letters, and through whose eyes we learn about history. Now, I have to admit, I hesitated which of all these characters to bring forth in our discussion, whom to talk about. So I finally decided that we'll leave the readers to discover which one they like and which they dislike. But my question is rather personal to you. Which of the characters you presented you found not necessarily to your liking, but most fascinating to you?
It's a difficult question and a very good question, because in a way I was fascinated by them all. I mean, there were some I found absolutely horrific, like Adolf Hitler, for example, and some I admired, like President Roosevelt. I think perhaps it was the characters I hadn't known much about before I wrote the book, and I learned more about. One of the characters I found absolutely fascinating, if I have to choose a favorite or two, was Babur, the Mughal, who founded the Mughal Empire and who
The observer.
Yes, but also a man of action and an extraordinary document. I mean, how many kings or princes or emperors at the time were writing their memoirs, their diaries? None, I think, apart from him. And he grew up in this very wild part of Central Asia, but he had a tremendous appreciation for beauty, for gardens. I mean, he was a ferocious fighter. Whenever he conquered somewhere, he did so often ruthlessly, but then he would build a garden. And he wrote poetry, and he wrote about himself. I mean, you get these enormous, very touching details where he talks about how he feels lonely, or he feels despair, or he doesn't know where he's going. So I found him fascinating. It was an insight into a world that I didn't know about, and this deeply personal voice. I also liked, my observers were pretty much all women, and I found that interesting. I didn't mean anything. When I started out, I didn't mean to look just at women, but I thought perhaps it's because women were not expected in the past to be creatures of action or decision makers, and often didn't have much power, although of course they're the exceptions. But often they observed, and I think they learned to observe because it mattered for them. They needed to know what was going on. They needed to know who it was they were dealing with. And so I found some of the diaries and letters of those women also fascinating.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask a question which is connected to your book, but brings us to the present moment. In your book, at a certain point, you write, at certain moments, it really does matter who is in the driver's seat or who is making the plans. Now, starting from this, which set me thinking, I have to admit, my question to you is coming to the present moment. When you look around and you see that we are living in troubled times, yes, the disruptive times, the pandemic on the one hand, climate change on the other, the revolution in communication technology, the rising importance of social media, the constant nagging and I would say fighting from some people of the free press, so on and so forth. This on the one hand. And on the other, you have a series of personalities that have erupted on the political scene, the international scene. And, you know, you just look around and you see, of course, Donald Trump in the United States, but you see Putin in Russia, Erdogan in Turkey, closer to Romania, in neighboring Hungary, Viktor Orban. You see Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in the Philippines, and the list can go on. Now, how would you, is this a new type of leaders that we are faced with, or how would you consider them as a group of strong men that want to leave their mark on the present moment, on the political arena? Do you distinguish between them? What is your opinion on that?
It's a curious time we live in, I think, and many things are happening at once, and I think a lot of us are very troubled by it. I think some of those leaders, and it is interesting that they're all men. I don't know if this is just coincidence or maybe a difference between the genders, but the women who are leaders at the moment seem to be doing a very successful job of building consensus and working with their people. I think of Angela Merkel, for example,
yes,
in Germany, and I think of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand.
The Prime Minister of New Zealand, who had great success in combating the pandemic.
And has an approval rating which is unheard of in a democracy. I mean, I think her approval rating was around 90%.
Right.
Some of the leaders we have, I think, are very typical. We've seen these leaders before. Bolsonaro, in a way, comes out of the tradition of the strong man, the man who speaks openly about his wishes and so on. And I think Putin very much comes out of a tradition in Russia. What I find disturbing is that in well-established democracies, where you tend to hope that the democratic controls and the institutions and the values are strong enough to contain any sort of leader, we have leaders who are really breaking through those institutions and those norms and perhaps changing them forever. Donald Trump in the United States is a phenomenon which I've never seen before in the history of the United States. I mean, there have been incompetent leaders before, and there have been leaders who have resorted to demagoguery. Certainly, you think of sometimes Richard Nixon, for example.
Yes.
But you've never had a leader in the United States who has so violated American institutions and norms and seems to pay no heed to them. I mean, I don't think he probably really understands the American Constitution, but that doesn't matter because he feels he can do it.
Or history.
Or history. No, I mean, there's a story that he was taken to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, where, of course, there was that infamous attack by the Japanese on the Americans in 1941, and he turned to the person beside him and said, "So what happened here?" This is very worrying indeed. And I think those of us in the democracies are very concerned about what is happening to our institutions. And you see in your next door neighbor of Hungary how easily institutions can be turned aside and how easily a government can use its considerable powers to amass more power. And I think this is very concerning indeed. I think we are at a time when the quality of leaders is worrying, both in the democracies and in the countries which aren't democratic.
Yes. Now, this brings me to the following question. This year you have been appointed to the Council on Foreign Relations as visiting distinguished historian. It's yet another acknowledgement of your career, of your accomplishments, of your work. Now, on the Council on Foreign Relations website, one can read the following. MacMillan is advising on lessons learned from historical events, and applying them to modern day challenges, which is actually a recognition of the importance of history and its relevance in contemporary life. Recently, in the latest issue of Foreign Affairs, the September-October issue, you publish an eye-opening essay, which is entitled Which Past is Prologue? Heeding the Right Warnings from History. And there you quote Mark Twain, who said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Mm-hmm. Now, my question to you, which is actually meant for our viewers who maybe don't have the opportunity to read your article in Foreign Affairs, is which period in history rhymes with our present moment, in your opinion?
I don't think there's ever an exact rhyme. I don't think history repeats itself because the circumstances are always different. But I think we look at the past and we see things that are similar. I mean, we do this in our own lives. We say, I just met such and such a person and they're rather like someone else I met 10 years ago. Or I face a situation at work which reminds me of another situation. We do this all the time. And so when I look at the present, I'm reminded partly of the period before 1914, before the First World War, when you had a shift in the international power structure, you had revolutionary currents of ideas running through the world which were destabilizing. You had elites who were worried that they might be about to lose power. I mean, I think there are similarities. You had a British Empire which felt itself to be under pressure from rivals. You had a rising Germany, a rising Japan, a rising United States. And so those are similarities. And you also had a real reaction before 1914 to globalization, which of course we're seeing again today, because the period before 1914 was, before today, one of the most globalized, well, the most globalized period in world history. And there are, it seems to me, also echoes of the 1920s and 1930s, the interwar period. But again, I think we have to be careful. I mean, some people are saying, oh, we're in a situation like the 1930s and we're sliding towards another great war. And I don't think that is true. And I think it's dangerous to think like that because, in fact, we may then begin to expect it. So I think when we look at the past, we need to just take warnings. And what looking at the past can do, I think, is help us to ask good questions. What if today we don't take certain measures? Or what if we do take certain measures? Let's look at the past and see when similar measures were taken or not taken. Let's look at the past and see what happened when you got an arms race between great powers. And we are seeing now an arms race between the United States and China. What happened and why were arms races dangerous and why are they dangerous today? These are the sort of questions that history can help us to ask.
Thank you. I have 3 more questions to go. Okay. I know our time is up. So these are very personal questions, okay. Professionally personal. Okay. But I'm sure our readers are interested not only in reading your books, but knowing you better. So I'll just run through them quickly. Okay. So if you'd be kind enough to answer them. So the first one is, who is your favorite historian or favorite history book?
Well, again, that's very difficult because I change my mind from time to time. But recently I've been reading Thucydides and he on the Peloponnesian Wars, and he is a wonderful historian. Among more modern historians, one of my great heroes is a historian called Tony Judd, who wrote a wonderful history of Europe after the Second World War, and wonderful essays and wonderful things. And what I valued both in him and I think in Thucydides is they both told it like they saw it, as we say in English. You know, they were very honest. They often said things that were unpopular and not accepted. And that I admired because they were brave, they did their work, they did their research, and they followed that research to often very startling conclusions.
Okay, that's a good incentive for us as publishers as well, to go and think of publishing new books of interest. Now, another one which is linked to your career, what stirred your interest in history? When was the moment when you decided that it is history that you wanted to study and that you took this path?
I always liked history, and I think it was in part because I have a curiosity about people. I mean, historians have our gossips. You know, we like.
Yes, you write lovely about that, if I may say so. In your book, you have an excellent chapter about gossiping. Yes.
Well, I think we do. And it's not unkind, I hope, but it's what makes people work and what makes them tick and who are they? And I was very lucky because I had parents who read to us and told us stories. And when I was young, I loved the stories about when they were children and what was it like. And that, I think, helped stir me. And I did history at high school and liked it very much. And when I got to university, I had to choose. And I think it's a process. I often say this to students. You are deciding what you don't like and deciding what you like more. And I decided I had to choose between English literature and history. And I just thought history is the thing I want to spend my life with.
Okay. Okay, and the last one is about the art of writing history. You write these huge books sometimes, yes, like the ones we have already published about the First World War. They are imbued with information, filled with detail, yet they read like novels. Mm-hmm. Yes, they are captivating, fascinating. You just can't put the books down. What is the secret of writing history books and making history so appealing?
I think for me, three things. I taught for a long time students who were not history majors. They had to take some liberal arts subjects, and they were often engineers or nurses or business students. And so I learned to speak to them, I think, and tell them stories and get them interested. I think also I would always advise students to work out which writers you admire and why. And the sorts of writers I admire enormously are those who write very clearly and don't write down, don't talk down, don't condescend to the reader. But I think finally when you write, you must always have an ideal reader in mind. And for a long time, my ideal reader was my parents. They would read everything I wrote. They would make criticisms, although they were very kind and they hated to do it. But I kept that in mind. I mean, they were people who read a lot, but were not historians. And now I keep in mind, my parents are both dead, but my ideal readers are the rest of my family, my sister and my brothers. And I keep them in mind because they like reading, but they have never done history as a subject.
Yes, it's a true talent, a genuine gift. And we are very happy to be publishing now, as I said, your third book, History's People. And we are looking forward to see the answer we shall get from our audience. And there is another surprise, but later on. But I take this opportunity of sharing with our viewers this information, that there is another title that you wrote, and it's in the making with our publishing house, a book about war.
Yeah. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. And my only regret, I'm delighted to be published in Romanian. My only regret is I can't come to Romania myself and enjoy your lovely country again. I've had so many happy times there, but perhaps one day when the COVID quiets down, we can all meet again.
I'm sure that we'll have a great opportunity for a conference and a meeting with our readers.
I will hope so.
Margaret MacMillan, thank you so much. It's been a delight talking to you.
Well, Livia, it's been a great pleasure talking to you, and thank you.